everything else we do. So I spend most of my time in leadership, human resources, management operations, and then financial management, which we will focus on today. But they're honestly all interconnected. So you do one thing and it impacts something else. And that's just sort of how a small business works. So I'm sure some of you have seen this diagram. It's pretty common, financial cycle. And the challenge I always find with this, well, where are you now? How do you jump into this cycle? And how does it actually work? You just jump in now and figure it out. Just basically start where you are, start today. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's better to do something about thinking about your finances than nothing, even if it's not fully complete or as comprehensive as you wish it could be. It's never going to be perfect, and an estimate is better than nothing. So if you need to round or just, do your best, that's a solid way to start. So for today, what I really wanted to talk about was when you might want to be doing certain financial tasks. So this is derived from a lot of conversations that I have with firm owners who I work with regularly. And it's not what I find is one of the bigger challenges is that all the things you're supposed to be doing, but sometimes it's easier to do the things you know how to do and keep doing the easier things rather than stretching into those harder financial things that you might be ready to do. So spending time very efficiently working on these easier financial tasks might actually be preventing you from thinking of some of the bigger things that your firm is ready to do. So I'm going to suggest some ways to spend your time, some of the tasks you should be doing, but keep in mind that as your business grows, as your business matures and becomes more financially stable, as you become a more confident owner and you understand when to trust your gut, your financial management will also evolve. So the process and what you did year one of your business is probably not going to be what you need to do 5 years in or 10 years in, or certainly if you have staff now and are growing as a business. So it's good to do a gut check every once in a while and see, well, I've been doing this for a while. What should I change? Maybe some things I really don't need to do anymore. I've outgrown it, but I should be focusing on a few new things to continue growing the financial stability of your business. So I will dive into this. It may not be the right fit. It might not be the frequency that you're thinking for your business, but some of these things should resonate with you. So let's start with daily tasks. This one should be a no-brainer. Do your timesheet. Easier said than done, okay? I totally get it. But if you don't do your timesheet, other people in the office might not do their timesheet either. So it can become a snowball effect that it's not important, doesn't matter, not a priority. If you don't make it a priority, it won't be a priority for anybody else. And the reality is, if you don't have a sense of how long you've spent on your projects, you don't really know if they're profitable. Is your fee accurate? Is it not? Did you actually lose money even though you had an amazing project? If you don't track your time to your best ability, you won't really have the data to show you when you need to increase your prices. And I know everybody likes to think like, oh, the client doesn't want to pay, they can't pay more. But if you have the data that it actually takes this long to do this type of project, you can more confidently raise your fees and ask for a little more money for the project when you know it's necessary. So for firm owners, I also recommend some overhead categories. And I know it can be annoying, but if you start tracking some of the biggest overhead categories that take your time, you can begin to sort of understand when you might need to hire some help. So is marketing really killing you? You're spending way too much time on marketing. Maybe you need a consultant to help you get through award season, and that would really free up your time to be more billable. maybe if you're inching towards hiring an office manager, it would be helpful to know the proportion of time that you spend on these overhead tasks. So when you're writing a job description, you know your office manager, your future office manager, is going to spend 50% of time on marketing, 40% supporting finance, whatever it is that you want to offload to somebody else. It doesn't have to be an office manager. It could be somebody else that you're delegating to as well. But it helps give you some data that, I'm spending too much time on this one thing. I need to pass it on.
Hey, Erin,
Mm-hmm.
quick question in the chat. Did you mean 10 minutes as in 10-minute increments, or as in it should take you 10 minutes a day to do the timesheet?
Good question. I tried to guesstimate how long I think this should take you to do. Some of these tasks I really can't, but when I could, I think 10 minutes max is usually what it takes to do a timesheet. And I know this from personal experience. When I worked at AIA, they wanted us to do timesheets, and I was super annoyed by it because we were all overhead. So I timed myself every day. And eventually I didn't have to because it really only took me 4 minutes. And it wasn't that big of a deal as much as I really wanted to hate it. So 10 minutes is probably achievable for you every day. When I'm delinquent with my timesheet at CVG, I can generally do a few weeks in less than 30 minutes, but that's not ideal. I know I'm missing some things that I did, and I know I can't remember everything as well as I like to keep my calendar up. It's just best practice to do it daily if you can. And then from finances, there's nothing you really should need to do daily. You might feel compelled to check your bank account daily, but hopefully you're getting to a point where you're stable and you don't need to do that daily. So let's talk about weekly. When you're thinking about your project finances, what you really want to do is check your staff timesheets every week. So every Friday, all your staff should be submitting a timesheet because you're setting that precedent. And you just really want to give it a once over to make sure somebody didn't forget, somebody was on vacation, somebody billed half of the week to overhead and you didn't think that was appropriate. Better to catch it sooner when you can easily make some adjustments than to wait a few weeks and then like, well, what did you work on? I can't remember. Nobody will remember at that point. So if you have an office manager, this is one thing that could be delegated to them to at least do a first pass of all the timesheets. Number one, did everybody submit a timesheet? That's a great task for an office manager to follow up on because everybody needs a reminder every once in a while. But your office manager could also check if budget codes are correct. You'll have to do that if you don't have an office manager, but it should get quick. It should get a little more quick as your staff get used to doing timesheets and understand your standards. Your project manager should review, obviously, to see that your project work is getting done and billed correctly. Now, I understand you might be the person doing all of this, but in a bigger firm, there might be some opportunities to delegate. And again, hopefully 15 minutes to look at all of your staff timesheets. In terms of your firm finances, on a weekly basis, you probably do want to look at your cash flow. What's the money in, money out, and did anything happen that you weren't expecting? So certainly, if your bank accounts are getting a little bit low, you want to address that or be aware of when bills will be paid if you're not the one paying them. And then bi-weekly, and I understand this is a little bit in the weeds, which I'm not supposed to be in the weeds, but every 2 weeks is generally a pretty good cadence to take a step back and look at your project progress. And it's not just, is the work getting done? Are you meeting the deadline? It's also, well, what are you going to be invoicing? Is the invoice what you expected it to be? Are you over the hours that you expected to be? Are the right staff working on the project? Or did you actually have a PM doing the work that a designer should have been doing and it killed your fee? So looking at some detail every 2 weeks helps you stay ahead of some of the problems that might creep up on you. It also hopefully should present some opportunities to ask for additional services sooner rather than later if you have that opportunity. And then sometimes as part of this conversation, if you're meeting with your PMs, they're probably the people who would be helping you with proposals and thinking about what other new work you're going after. So as you're talking about your billings and invoices for your current work, you could certainly also talk about your pipeline, what projects are coming, what proposals are a priority, how do you fit in the non-billable work to get to write those proposals into your workflow. If you happen to have somebody that does more of your business development, this might be a separate meeting, but setting aside some dedicated time to talk about new work and work that you're going after is the real takeaway here. So you can integrate that business development work into an existing meeting that you already have. You just don't want to forget to think about business development and going after new work, especially when you're busy. Hard as it is to do, you always want to be thinking a bit ahead. So on the firm finance side of this, once you have a sense of invoicing where your projects will be, that can help you do some cash flow projections. So it'd be great, if you have fixed fee projects and if you have deadlines you're going to meet, you should be able to anticipate your invoicing. Hourly projects are a little bit harder to predict, but trust your gut and probably put in some time there. But what you really want to keep an eye on is about 3 months out of your cash flow. So projecting the cash that you think your business will be bringing in for about 3 months. Now, certainly the first month is a lot easier than the third month out, but it should really just at least be a gut check. Are your invoices aligning with your expenses? Do you need to prioritize one deadline over another because that is a bigger fee and that fee is necessary for you to make payroll? So if you have some of this data available, it will help you prioritize project work when needed, just to make sure your cash flow is adequate and planned for. The easier part of these biweekly firm finances would be looking at your payroll. That should become routine, and then drafting any invoices. Everybody hates doing all of their invoices at once. It's like the worst day, the first day of the month, everybody dreads it. If you can get ahead of that and prep some of your invoices that you're going to send out in the middle of the month, hold them, it'll be a little bit easier to catch up at the end of the month and finalize everything. So 2-week checks are helpful here. And again, if you have a bookkeeper or an office manager, there's opportunities to delegate here as well. I wanted to talk just a little bit about bookkeeping, since usually a bookkeeper is the very first thing that is outsourced. Highly recommend outsourcing to a bookkeeper if you're able to find one and you can make that work financially. Bookkeepers are generally $75 to $80 an hour, so obviously less than your billable rate as principal. So, and they can do everything faster. They're just better at finance. They're better at being the controller where your money is going. So what takes you 10 hours would probably take them less than 5. So bookkeepers are definitely worth the money in my experience. They're not a replacement for an accountant though, so you'll still probably need an accountant to help you with your taxes and all of that. If you are paying your accountant to be your bookkeeper, you're probably overpaying for that work. So something to consider, even though it is convenient. I also find bookkeepers can be really helpful in following up with clients who are really slow to pay. So if you hate being the bad guy and calling them up, you're like, Where's my check? The bookkeeper can usually be your first line of defense for that. So for those of you who really hate those conversations, that's just another thing to ask your bookkeeper to help you with. The other thing, if you can find a bookkeeper to help you with your cash flow, that is a great bookkeeper. They all can't do it, but the bookkeeper is usually the only other person who will care about cash projections and help you think through cash projections for the firm. So if you can find a bookkeeper that is willing to help you with that, hire them. And if you're not asking your bookkeeper that now, I would definitely open that conversation and see if they can help you systematize those projections as a starting point. And again, if you have an office manager, usually they are the primary coordinator of your bookkeeper. So the day-to-day coordination can be delegated as well. And then payroll service, if you are thinking about hiring your first employee, usually payroll service is the first thing that you need. Bookkeepers can do this. They don't all like to do it. So you may need another system. There's options locally or usually with your Chamber of Commerce. And then I put a few that we recommend for small firms on screen. So these, you're probably familiar with most of them: ADP, JustWorks, Insperity, and Gusto. I see ADP and Gusto the most, but the other two, I believe, are also helpful. So a PEO, just so you know, they'll help you with benefits as well as just payroll. So if you're looking to increase and actually offer benefits, then a PEO would be the way to go as a starting point rather than finding them down the road. So if you find a PEO, they can do payroll now and then benefits down the road. Okay, let's jump back into monthly. So when you're looking at project finances, this is obvious, you're doing this already, which is approving project invoices. 1 hour, that might not be realistic, but it's definitely more time is required for approving invoices. If you have an efficient process, hopefully it's an hour, but sometimes it takes far more than that. So ideally, your invoices are prepped in advance, as in before the first of the month. So if you can split up some of this work over a few days, you'll probably thank yourself for prepping that in advance. Our recommendation is really to send your invoices as close to the first of the month as you can. I know it's difficult to do that, but setting that as a goal and trying your best to make it is a best practice. And then looking at firm finances on the monthly is really when you start having more firm-wide things to do. So you'd want to review your profit and loss statement to the best of your ability. It may not be that complex, but if something is not right, you'd want to just put eyes on it on a monthly basis to see what's changing and talk to your bookkeeper if you notice something that's incorrect. You also do want to give a quick review of your actual expenses compared to your budget. I say quick because sometimes things come up in the month and some big bills come certain months, even though that's not tied to your budget or what you were planning. So these are really more quarterly, but putting a quick review of them monthly is usually best practice. Okay, so quarterly. This is usually where CVG comes in and helps because firm owners are not doing anything quarterly. So it's not that hard, I promise, but this is probably what we want to be thinking about. So from the project side, it's really a best practice to do a postmortem of your projects. So not only what went well operationally, how did you get the deliverables out the door, but look at your project finances when the project is complete. And this is one of those things during the closeout that often gets neglected, but it's really helpful to understand how your project did really, truly performed at the end of the project so that you can make some modifications to your future proposals. And any equations that you have baked into your project estimating forms, you want to notice quickly if you should be changing those formulas and actually charging more based on their most recent work. So try to figure out checklist, how do you systematize a project closeout, and what are the financial metrics that you really do care about and will use that you want to pull out of that project so you're not digging around for it when you're at the very end of writing a proposal. So oftentimes it's like a one-pager summary of all the things you needed to know about the project. A lot of it is marketing, but I would encourage you to also include those financial metrics that will be useful to your future self. Okay. So then when we look at firm finances, this is where you really do need to dedicate a little more time to looking at the financial performance of the firm. Again, reviewing your profit and loss statement is sort of a standard protocol. You should do that every quarter. Where I think, actually, the next slide, what's most important to me here is to look at your actual expenses compared to your budget. So if your expenses are really out of whack with what you had planned or the revenue that is coming in, on a quarterly basis, you'll get a better sort of synopsis of where you are. So if you need to make any adjustments to your budget, as in cut some of the things that you had hoped to do, reduce your expenses to better align with the revenue that you're seeing come in, the actual revenue, not the projected revenue. This is the time to really make any changes to your plan, would be on that quarterly basis. So you still have time to recover. If your profitability is down, you can make some adjustments, cut a few expenses to guarantee that profitability, or at least to create a little bit of buffer, maybe delay some things you're going to do just to see if your revenue comes in before you commit. And then if you have the ability, I also like to look at some key financial and operational indicators. That's a mouthful. But I like to look at staff utilization rates and your billable ratio quarterly. Both of those are actually annual metrics. And I know you can get them if you use Monograph. Utilization rate is already, it's a new chart that you can just pull up and look. It's helpful to get a sense of what your staff is doing. But it really will indicate if somebody went on vacation, you'll see a drop. If somebody's on family leave, you'll see a drop. But if somebody is overworking, that's probably the bigger red flag that you want to see on a quarterly basis. So if somebody on staff is over 85% utilized, you might want to check in and see what are they doing? What are they not doing to achieve that really high efficiency? It might be that you're understaffed, but it might also be that they're inefficiently working or they're on too many deadlines and they're at risk of getting burned out. So I take a look at the upper end of that. Yes.
Quick question. I actually have the same one. What is the difference between a staff utilization rate, which I think I'm familiar with a billable ratio?
Great question. I have some more slides that will show you how to do billable ratio further on. But it's basically the difference between what you actually earned and what you could have earned. So there's a percentage in there, but I will address that later on. And I'm sort of going to show you the way to hack your way into a billable ratio if you don't have that metric yet. So good question though. Okay, annual. This is where we're going to spend a little bit of time because your breakout is going to be about setting some annual goals. So I'm going to walk through some of this with you. And I know I've been throwing a lot at you and we're at halftime and we'll try to go faster. So project finances annually, again, you want to look at some trends if you need to adjust any of the equations in your estimating spreadsheets that you're using. But when we're thinking annually about your firm finances, that's really where you're spending your time. So going into Q1 or Q4 now, you're sort of looking back on the year, and Q1, you're using the information from Q4 to really plan ahead for the year. Now, again, you should start now in Q4 planning for 25, but once 25 closes, you want to check and make sure your assumptions were accurate. So what we recommend. So look back, do all of this, but also look forward and do the same equations for forecasting. So we'll talk about how to forecast now. So net operating revenue, annual budget, profitability goals are sort of baked into those. And then updating your billing rates. Helpful reminder here, you're allowed to update your billing rates every year, just like engineers. Architects are usually loath to do that. And then updating any utilization targets based on performance or what you know is coming. So let's dive into this. So net operating revenue, this is one of the metrics that we often measure. It's different than your gross revenue. So it's looking at your revenue, your gross revenue, and taking out all of your direct expenses. And everybody always wants to know, well, what's a direct expense? It's anything that is in the cost of goods sold, typically any reimbursable expense per your project contract. The one variable that we often see is if direct labor is included. If you use Deltek or another software, oftentimes direct labor is included as a direct expense. We typically pull this out and include all labor as an operational expense. So you really, the argument for it is your labor is a set cost. You have staff who you pay whether or not you have work. So that is why we take the labor costs and move them to your operational expenses. So oftentimes you can see your net operating revenue as gross profit in QuickBooks if everything is set up correctly. So the one thing to really check is your direct labor. If direct labor is included, then I would move that down in your chart of accounts and make it an operating expense. Okay. So if you don't have net operating revenue in mind, we can work through what that could be based on the capacity of your staff. So here's sort of a way to hack your way into it. So if you have all this information, certainly use the data that you have. If you're starting from nothing, here's a basic way to do it. So I am the principal of the firm. I work 2,080 hours theoretically in a year. That is 40 hours a week, 52 hours or 52 weeks in a year. That is our standard metric. My utilization rate as principal is 50%, and my billing rate is $200 an hour. Those are the metrics that you need to have available. And if you don't know utilization rates, here is sort of a starting point rule of thumb. Basically, 85% is the highest utilization rate. That makes sense for a designer. The principal is going to range from 40 to 60% utilization, just based on how many other principals there are, how you divide up your work. And then everybody in between is somewhere between those numbers. Really varies on your firm, and this is just a starting point to get you moving. So other thing is just one more reminder to review those billing rates annually. So what you do to figure out the amount of money somebody could earn the firm, this is theoretical. If everything works perfectly, I could work at a 50% utilization rate at $200 an hour and bring in $208,000 over the course of a year. Then want to do this for everyone on staff. So this is my family. I just made this up for my pretend firm. Rocky is a project manager, but he only works 4 days a week. So his hours worked per year are reflective of 4 days per week. his utilization is independent of the hours that he works. So he's in the middle, he's about 75% utilized, and his billable rate I made up. Same for designer. Designer works full-time, 85% utilized at a lower billing rate. You add up all of the potential revenue that each staff member could bring into your office. This is theoretical. Because you probably know, well, they're not going to actually bring in that much revenue. You might know in your gut what your goal is for next year. Based on your performance this year, you've been doing this long enough, you know what your revenue goal is. So let's say your gut tells you that your net operating revenue goal is closer to 550. So the difference between those numbers is 85%. That's 80. You're achieving 85% of what you could achieve in terms of revenue. That's your billable ratio. So you can also do this for 2024. So we're far enough along in the year that you could just make this little spreadsheet for yourself and then have a more realistic billable ratio based on your performance this year that can guide your planning for next year. So again, this is not the right way to do billable ratio, but if you don't have all the data and you're starting from nothing, this works. And now if you start tracking it, you'll be able to look at your actual billable ratio moving forward. This is really just a planning tool. Okay, so your budget, hopefully you have a budget. If you don't, it's really just derived from your chart of accounts. These are the typical categories that we see. Marketing and business development, office expenses is everything that you don't know where to put. Professional services, rent, insurance, wages, and payroll. So you can basically rearrange your chart of accounts to put them in these categories, most likely, and use that as a starting point for your budget for next year. Once you have your net operating revenue, you can subtract your expenses or your budget to understand what your profit would be. Now, the goal is typically 20% profit, but if you're not there, you're not there. Be realistic with your profit. If you can get to 10% or more profit, you'll feel a little more stable. I like to plan for at least 10% so you have some buffer if things go wrong, don't go as planned. So if you can carve out 10% profit in your planning, it gives you room to adjust next year if needed. Okay, and then it's helpful to do a gut check. So this is really just looking at your revenue, expenses, and your profit over the past years. So if you can pull those three numbers from your past P&Ls, your annual P&Ls, you can sort of see how your firm is doing historically and then use that data to help inform next year's planning. Okay, we're at the breakout. That was a lot. So I'm ready to stop talking. I'm sure you're ready to stop listening to me. Okay, so for the breakout, let's talk and let's try to figure out one financial goal for 2025. So what I see with firm owners, there's always a lot of goals that you may have for the year, often too many. I would limit it to 4 if I'm being honest. 4 is reasonable, you can probably do it. One of your goals should be financial. It usually isn't, but if you don't have a financial goal, then what are you striving to do? So something in your annual planning should be financially driven. There's a few examples here. It might be that you're developing that net operating revenue goal. It might be that you just simply want to update your billing rates because you haven't done that in a while. Maybe you'll tackle an annual budget. You don't have to do everything every year. Well, once you get used to it, it's easier to maintain. But you don't have to start everything this year. Start one thing that you know you can do. And what I find is to achieve a financial goal, there's usually an operational improvement that's also required. So if you are going to start tracking your time, that's great. But usually you would want to write a time tracking policy so that everybody's tracking time in the same way. That's the operational counterpart. So what operational thing will help you achieve your financial goal? And both of those should actually be combined because you probably can't achieve one without the other. So in the next 10-ish, 15 minutes, Kathleen, what do you recommend? We will tackle this, or you will tackle this with as much time as we can give you. But if you can think of one financial goal, one operational improvement to help you achieve that goal, that's really hopefully what we want you to achieve by the end of this breakout.
Okay, so I'm putting you into rooms of 3 so that you have 15 minutes to talk.